All right, let's get started. If I can make it advance. There we go. First one, Ayla Kanan sent this in. You may remember seeing these in previous presentations. This kind of reddish wine cap. You can see in that image, you can see it better in this one. I'm using my finger. You've got this rugose annulus. It's very rough and kind of thick. It can kind of fall off fairly easily. You can see it down here too. She got a spore print here. You can actually tell from the gills that these are kind of going to that purpley black spore color. Growing in wood chips. This is a very common one in the spring. I think she might have sent me this last month. Stropharia rugosa annulata, the garden giant, wine cap stropharia. That's the ones where, like, if you see this and you do have a garden and you happen to put mulch or wood chips, see if you can bring a little baggie with you and grab a little hunk of that fresh mycelium, put it in your mulch. Maybe you'll get a little patch going yourself. All right, this one's submitted by Daniel Berman. Kind of gnarly looking in this picture. Little brownish fibrils in the center of the cap here. You can't really tell, and on the next images, you're not going to be able to tell either. But I kind of knew this one, and you can see here's like a little pine needle right here. That's going to come into play in a minute. But so these are some fresher, younger specimens. These are they tend to have a little yellow in them, and those brown fibrils in the center. The gills, which when I first found a young one of these, kind of confounded me. I was like, those gills like were nothing. There was like just a tiny little ridge, but as they get older, they'll start getting longer. And so when I found a young one of these some time ago, I was like, what is this? But they will grow and get much bigger. They're also, once they get older, the gills will be kind of serrated or eroded. And that's one of the helpful identifying features of this one. This is Neolentinus pidius. They call it the train wrecker because this grows on conifer wood. And so you can see there's some pine needles. It's hard to tell what that wood is, just from peeled bark logs sitting on the ground. But we know that this one grows on conifer. So this would be growing in the railroad ties on the railroad tracks. And so if it ate it away enough, it could screw up the tracks and then mess up the trains. All right, Daniel sent this one in too. This is probably one of the more commonly found, can be quite prolific lactarius in the area. So if you see these striped looking mushrooms, it's very often that this is going to be something like a lactarius. They call this zonate, and there are quite a few lactarius that are zonate. This one just happens to be like very zonate. Also the coloration of it, it's kind of like that pale orange. They can be rather large, they could be 10 maybe 12 inches across. You can see there's a little bit of the white latex happening right here. They kind of have pretty stumpy little stipes, so they don't have long stipes, so they're kind of close to the ground, fluted. And like I said, they can be quite prolific at the right time of the year and just be tons of them all over the place. This is Lactarius samicola, I believe. Typically grown with oaks. And anyway, now that you've seen it, you may encounter it because they can be pretty common. I know I've seen it around a lot. All right, Daniel submitted this one as well. Kind of the same picture, a little bit closer here. So this is one of the cauliflower mushrooms. There are a couple of different cauliflower mushrooms. I'm used to finding these in the fall, so I thought it was a little unusual that he found a really nice one in the summer. One of them has kind of more of an egg noodly look, so it's got these little lobes all over it. Then there's another one that has more kind of zonate spathulate, so they're kind of little flat lobes instead. So this one, we used to call it Spiraceus crispa, There is also a radicata, which is kind of means it roots. I believe radicata is around conifer, but now they've realized, okay, that's not actually the species that we have in this country. This is Spiraceus americana. This is a really tasty mushroom and pretty easy for a beginner to identify. So if you can find it, it can be pretty tough to clean though. Anyway, that's the cauliflower mushroom. All right, Ayla found these. I believe this was another from last month. So these are a little older. Don't look like much from far away, growing in the grass. You can see they're a little fuzzy on the top. Looking a little closer, you can say, oh yeah, that's got lots of fibrils all over it. It's almost got a fuzzy cortina-ish looking partial veil. I really liked this shot because it shows the marginate gills, which means this like white line right along the edge of the gill. As the spores are produced, which is happening and they're being caught on this kind of partial veil section right here. You can see it's got dark black spores. And another good feature is the gills. If you look at the gill face, it's mottled. And so as the spores mature at different rates, you've got darker spots and lighter spots. And so anyway, the modeling is pretty common. Now this is called Lacrimaria lacrimabunda. Actually, they changed it, didn't they? Back to Velutina. They've changed this one a lot. So I learned it as Sapphirella Velutina. I kind of like the Lacrimaria though, because if you find this and it's quite young, if you look at it up at the apex of the stalk right up here, if you get it in time, it'll actually have little droplets up there, almost like little teardrops up near the apex. It's kind of cool. Anyway, that one's pretty common. All right, Daniel found this. Apparently it's at the base of a big dead beech tree. This is another one of those common mushrooms. You find them pretty often. You can see the kind of wrinkles in the cap. That's one of the things that kind of gives it away to me when you first see it. He didn't quite get the base very well, which is all right. So it has this kind of brownish stipe with some fibrils on it. If it wasn't blurry, he's got a better shot of the gills in this one. It's got attached gills, meaning they run all the way to the stipe. You can see that better right here. This pinkish color actually isn't the spores. He did get a spore print. Actually, there was another photo. Actually, let's see if you can see it. There's actually another mushroom right here, right under it. And so he had a different photo that had that mushroom with this one pulled away and it was all like pure white. So he kind of got an in-field spore print of white. So this might just be a discoloring to like that tan color. Anyway, this is another one that they've changed the name many times. This is Hymenopellis furfuraceae. Call it the rooting colibia. It used to be rooting. I mean, it used to be a colibia, and it was Udimentiella. And anyway, they've been changing the name. Hopefully, they'll stick to Hymenopellis furfuraceae. And if anybody knows some name changes that I'm not getting right, feel free to chime in. But they call it rooting, but it's actually growing from wood under the ground. So it's actually not growing down into the ground. It's actually seeking the gas changes. And so it'll send up its little primordia until it hits the atmosphere, and then it can start forming the mushroom. So it's not really rooting down, it's seeking up. All right, Diana Gilpatrick, I think she sent these last month as well. I'm sure you've seen some of these. We've had them in the presentations in the past. Found these in a little drainage ditch. I'm talking about field spore prints. If you see all this brown all right here, this is actually the spores being deposited on this straw next to it. So there you go. It's like, oh, there's some mushrooms. They got a brown spore print. Now this one has a very cracked cap. Brown spores growing in mulchy areas, attached gills, so they're attached to the stem. This kind of leads you to agrosipy. There is an agrosipy called agrosipy dura that's called the crack cap agrosipy, but just because this is cracked doesn't mean that this is dura, because if the environmental conditions change, lots of mushrooms caps can crack. So I put this as the praecox cluster. There's quite a number that are very similar. From what I've found, dura is usually much larger, and these look like a bunch smaller, but I don't know. You'd probably have to do microscopic examination to really tell what exactly they are. All right, Jennifer Polk found this in Silver Spring. I actually saw this growing on a stump last week, just a fresh new guy coming out. So this is one that sometimes can be confused for hen of the woods. It kind of has those fronds like hen of the woods does. This one's usually lighter. And if you notice this little dark streak, that's actually not the normal color of the mushroom. That's actually probably a lot of times when the environmental conditions change and it dries out, it almost kind of bruises itself. So you get that black staining. This is actually the black staining polypore. These do tend to fruit from summer, kind of even getting closer to fall. But that's Marilynn Mendell. All right, Marilynn found these guys, kind of hard to see. It's these little red guys going on this log here. Zooming in, see, okay, that's not a mushroom, that's a slime mold. So this is the raspberry slime. This is Tubifera ferruginosa. And I don't know if this was a different section she found or if she came back to the same spot and these guys were eating it, but apparently the centipedes were really loving it. All right, some little brown pieces on a log. John Klonowski sent this one and he found this at Beaver Dam Creek. Zooming in close, got some really nice shots of that. This is your chocolate tube slime, Stemonitis, sorry, splendens, maybe splendens. I think there might be a few different species in there. So anyway, this is a Stemonitis. It's a slime mold, it's really cool. Even got the shots of its attachment. This is how the spores are produced. This is in the myxomycetes. It's more closer to a protist than a fungi. Marilynn found this guy. Well, maybe her pooch did. So we've had this some years ago when Thomas Rail was around. He found a big one of these. We had it at the meeting, and I mean, it was huge. It was probably 2 feet across. So looking closer, this shot's a little blurry, but you can see it's kind of staining brown there. The whole thing kind of stains brown like that if you bruise it. But this is what they're calling the white chicken of the woods, Laetiporus persicanus. And Marilynn told me she was talking to her friend, and apparently this one is edible too, which I found odd. But she said it was, I guess her friend ate it and it was stringy. But I didn't even know this one was edible. So another one by Marilynn, really nice shot of this guy. You'll notice some kind of color changes here and here, warts on the cap, very distinct. Flip it over, you see, okay, there's a partial veil there. You got some reddish staining on the stipe and on the gills. So this is, she didn't really get a good shot of the base, but free gills here. This is kind of leading to Amanita. So, and with the bruising and the brownish cap, this leads you to the blusher or Amanita rubescens, which they might be calling Amanita Mary rubescens. They might be changing the name, I'm not sure. Pretty common. This actually is one of the edible Amanitas, but don't eat any Amanitas if you're not certain. This has the some of the most deadly mushrooms in it. All right, Marilynn got another Amanita here. I initially thought this was something like Flavoconia that had the patches washed off. Then I was like, wait a second, that's kind of trooping together. Flavoconia doesn't necessarily troop together like that. Pull it out, you've got this vulva sac. So the patches didn't get washed off. They were left at the base in this little vulva. It's got free gills. I thought that the gills should be a little more yellow, but you know, there's different species. Maybe I just don't know Amanita jacksonii, which is the false Caesar. So I put it as a type of Amanita jacksonii. I may not know, like the ones I'm used to have a little bit more orange, very yellow gills, kind of a herringbone pattern almost left on the stipe, and usually a very much thicker membranous vulva sac. But I think that is more in the Jacksonii group than something like a Flaviconia type. Marilyn got this one. We've saw some of these quite a few times. Kind of like a little purplish fuzzy oyster. It would have kind of eroded gill margins. This is Panis neostrigosus. All right, Marilyn found these guys too, and she gave me a suggestion of the cracked capped bolete. So I haven't shown you the bottom yet. But anyway, so it's got pores. It's got a nice stipe going on it. It's terrestrial. So it looks like it is in the bolete group. And it does have these cracked caps. But as I was mentioning earlier, sometimes boletes will crack just because of environmental conditions. But after I started looking at more of the features, maybe this is one of the cracked cap, and mainly because when she cut it open, I thought it was very interesting. It has some bluing reaction in the cap context and some reddish staining in the stem context. I was like, oh, that's going to be easy to figure out. Of course, it wasn't. So reading through the Xerocamelus, some of those mushrooms, there are a couple that do have this type of staining. So maybe it is the Xerocamelus, which is one of the Chrysenteron is one of the cracked cap boletes. Usually their cracking is more like the cuticle instead of actually deep into the tissue, but sometimes it does go deep into the tissue. All right, Marilyn also found these guys. You've probably seen them around. They have this covering when they're young. Then they open up to have these it's a little bird's nest. And so the little eggs in there is peridioles that contains the spores. They're actually attached with a little thread. And so when the raindrops hit it, those little eggs can splash out and the thread stretches out. And if it hits a twig or a leaf or something, it can wrap around and stick to the leaf. And that way the spores are up, and when they're released, they can get further. So this is Crucibellum leve. There's some other types of bird nests. This one does not have striations in the nest, and it has the lighter colored eggs, whereas the Cyathus striatus has dark eggs with the little radial lines in there. Jereme George found these, a little washed out. We've got a cluster here. And when you look closer, looks like free gills, got some pinkish coloration. He did have a spore print too. I didn't include that one. So this looks like the one you typically find when you're out on morels. But this is probably a different species. This is probably the one that tends to grow from buried wood and things like that. This is Pluteus pedicstatus, not status. And then I wanted to include this guy. Douglas Miller sent this in. I actually had some of these grown in my yard as I was driving away last week. This is one you need to be careful of. They look like big, beautiful, lovely mushrooms. Turn them over. They're going to have green spores. This is Chlorophyllum molybdite. I put the green spored sickener because it's actually not a Lepiota. But this is the mushroom that causes the most poisonings in America. So make sure you don't have the chlorophyllum, make you really sick. All right, that's it for me. Marilyn submitted this one. I put it as a scop, some kind of polypore, but I thought those little leavings were very strange. I'm thinking maybe some bugs are tunneling and kind of pushing out the tissue and making these strings. I don't know. Anybody have any comments?
Oh, cool. That looks it looks like kind of like insect frass.
Yeah, but it
poo, right?
It does.
Insect poo.
It's kind of strange. Anyway, I thought it was kind of cool. Anyway, thanks. And hope to see you guys out there soon. I'll probably have a parade this weekend. And like I said, maybe going on. So take care.